Vivienne, let's start out introducing you with the question. You describe yourself to be a mad scientist. Could you comment on what you mean by that and how you or why you describe yourself as a mad scientist?
Well, I started my work right here at UC Berkeley as a researcher and a theoretical neuroscientist. And I love that work. I love doing basic science research and learning something new about the world that no one's ever seen before. But then one day my wife and I had an idea for an experiment, and we realized it wasn't an experiment, it was a company. So suddenly my life changed and I became an entrepreneur. And it turns out I'm a terrible entrepreneur, I'm a terrible businesswoman, and yet the companies were successful. So we started another one, and then another one, and then I was a chief scientist at another, and then another, and I found that I really loved solving problems. And after a little while, I got tired of running companies and tried to figure out what was the intersection of these two experiences that really made the life that I cherished the most. And I decided it was going out and solving otherwise unsolvable problems for people that really needed help, that couldn't hope to ever pay me a dime. And so what does a mad scientist do? We take problems. Dr. Ming, my daughter has 500 seizures a day, or our company doesn't know how to retain female employees, or our country doesn't know what to do about global AI policy. And if I think my team and I can meaningfully help, I pay for everything. We do it all for free, and whatever we invent, we give away. It turns out it's the worst business idea ever. But what it really boils down to is if we knew how to solve that problem ahead of time, it wouldn't be science. And if anyone else was doing what we're doing, it clearly wouldn't be mad. So that's what it boils down to, is generally just trying to help people, but help people on problems that everyone else has given up on.
So one of the exciting things that you get to do is travel the world and speak on, you just mentioned AI, the stage of AI, how far we are with it. And since that term is used so much, I was just wondering if you could comment on what AI really is, when AI is machine learning, like maybe you could differentiate those.
Absolutely. Right from the start in my career as an academic, if you've never heard of theoretical neuroscience, it is essentially using machine learning, a form of artificial intelligence, to studying the brain to come up with new machine learning. I got started in this field 20 years ago, and it was just sort of dumb luck that I was there as this turned into this huge, potentially world-changing thing that it's become today. So let's start with a really classic definition of artificial intelligence. It's any autonomous system that can make decisions under uncertainty. What go move should I make in this game? How fast should this car be going as it takes a left turn? I've got a resume in front of me. Should I bring this person in for an interview? Like, none of these have a right answer. They're all fundamentally uncertain. And the one thing they all had in common until about 10 years ago is pretty much only human beings could do it. So what's changed now isn't simply this abstract idea of artificial intelligence, but this more specific subfield of machine learning, which is in essence these massive scale statistical engines that can take data and build their own artificial intelligence decision processes. So given a picture, is there a giraffe here? Given a resume, should I bring a person in for an interview? It turns numbers into numbers. And if you really want to understand it, not at a mathematical level, which is probably not worth it because wait 3 years and we'll have a new set of technologies, but at a practical level, imagine any brief expert judgment now made cheaper, faster, and increasingly better than a human can make it. It's worth understanding, though, that these systems that might be playing a game or making a risk assessment off of a spreadsheet or reading a legal contract, they don't actually understand anything about those games or those contracts in the way human beings do. What they can do, often better than a human being, is turn numbers into numbers. And that alone is such a phenomenal transformation, particularly of the economics of these problems, that this truly might be as big a revolution as a lot of people promise. But I'll offer this one last insight into artificial intelligence. Two insights. One is that it is the most overhyped and underhyped technology that there is. Overhyped in the sense that it will somehow magically solve all of our problems for us. It won't. Like I said, it doesn't even understand the problems. Underhyped in the sense that if you can actually articulate a problem well, it can do it better than a person can. Those are true statements at the same time. And here's the other thing people really ought to know, particularly from the perspective of anyone hoping to build this into a company or medical research or anything else, which is AI cannot solve a problem that you don't already know how to solve. What it can do is transform the economics of that solution. And that alone is phenomenally powerful. But what happens is again and again, we see people naively taking a lot of sophistication and how to build machine learning systems and applying it to a problem they know nothing about and making that problem worse. In fact, in the end, those are human problems. And if we don't have good human solutions, the machines aren't going to bail us out.
What fascinates me about you is that you don't just speak about those things, but you actually do the work yourself. So could you comment on the most exciting thing that you've ever built with AI?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. One is unavoidable. So perhaps what I'm most notorious for is about 8 years ago, my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It was a big shock, no family history for us. This is an autoimmune disease that destroys the cells that make insulin. If you don't have insulin, you'll die. It's as simple as that. Doesn't matter how much you exercise or if you eat better. So what was shocking to me, though, wasn't the disease. It was that at the time, just a short few 8 years ago, it was still being treated by handwriting some numbers on a sheet of paper and having a doctor just eyeball them and estimate a treatment plan that would have to span months of time. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, I make models of the brain. Is diabetes really more complex than that? So I hacked all of his medical devices. It turns out I broke all sorts of US federal laws. And I built, as it turned out, one of the very first AI systems for diabetes. And I got to do it for my own son.
Is it okay if we have that on camera, that you broke all those laws?
It's on camera enough as it is to date. So in fact, I actually got to tell then President Obama about it at the White House. So because I was foolish enough to go to the White House wearing a live camera, a Google Glass on my head, and the Secret Service decided that I either needed to be kicked out of the White House or meet the president. Hopefully, in the circumstance, the right choice was meet the president. I might rather get kicked out right here in 2019 than meet the current president, but the world changes. So I built this system that, yes, it's about hard numbers, it's about artificial intelligence, but in the end, it was about a little boy who happened to be mine and being able to make a meaningful difference in his choice. And then we were able to just give it away. And in fact, we're building a whole new updated system that uses vastly less information and less data, and yet produces even better results. And I think one interesting thing to note that might be different than some of the stories people have heard about artificial intelligence to date is these projects have involved one person's data, and messy, messy data at that. There's this narrative that you have to have a massive body of data to even think about doing machine learning in the modern world. There's real value in data. I'm thrilled when I have more data. Again, it's about human problem solving. Given what I have, what can I build? That is the lesson I think so many people don't understand. So let me throw out this one, I won't make it as long. Of all the projects I've ever worked on that weren't truly personal in nature, I actually got to take what I learned how to do on my very first ever machine learning project. I was doing real-time expression recognition for a model for the CIA as an academic, which is morally gray, but it was cool as hell and got me hooked on doing machine learning. Building something that could tell someone was happy, like this fundamental human quality, and I could build a machine that could do it. I loved it. But lie detection for the CIA, I'm not against doing that, but it wasn't how I envisioned spending the rest of my life. Years later, I was able to do two things. One is build a system for Google Glass to read people's facial expressions, write the expression on the screen for autistic children so that they could learn how to read facial expressions and natural interactions. And we got to do that years ago. It turns out that's almost the only reason people use Google Glass nowadays, is for that exact application. So I was thrilled to be involved in that from the very start. And then the other is we got to build a system based on an even more advanced model of facial recognition to reunite orphan refugees with extended family members. It's a complex story. It has tons of heartbreak in it. But even for the challenges we had, I'm as proud of having worked on that as anything I've ever done.
You just said that there's a big misunderstanding of people think that they need vast amounts of data in order to start working. I find that with a lot of companies that I talk to, they have this big pressure to be innovative, try new things out. And they think that being innovative means working with data science, doing something with artificial intelligence. If you were to consult a company, like how would you, or what would you recommend them where they could start out? Like if you want to be innovative, if you want to start working with the technology, how could a company start out?
Well, clearly, for all the caveats, I would throw out about how to do it right, how to do it in a way that's ethical. I do this work. I mean, almost every project I work on involves machine learning at some level. So I believe in what it can do if used with some real thought. But it comes fundamentally as a tool to enhance human problem solving. So if you're thinking about how do I be innovative in solving a problem, then the worst thing you could do is take, your problem domain, whatever it might be. Here's something I was the chief scientist of. Let's go hire the best, find the best employees, use artificial intelligence to go out and discover them and bring them back in. And then you think, okay, well, then I'm going to collect a huge mass of data about who has been hired in the last 10 years. And I'm going to train a deep neural network to predict the best people from that data, because I have all of this information about who got promotions and who got hired. Well, I can tell you something which isn't going to come as a big shock. All that model is going to say is hire straight white men from wealthy backgrounds. Because guess who got jobs and promotions in their first year over the last 10 years? And for that matter, maybe the last 200 years.
I just read a study recently that Amazon was doing something similar, but then they figured the mistake and then they corrected it.
So that's a great and illustrative idea, partially because Amazon actually asked me to lead that project years ago. And I told them it wouldn't work. So it's exactly the same problem. Amazon, one of the most sophisticated and innovative companies in the world, whatever qualms someone might have about them, that is legitimate. And clearly their genius is for trying to hire me to do this project. I mean, let's be honest, their pitch to me was, in 7 years, we'll be a 1 million person company, and your job will be to make their life better. They understood me, and they spoke the right language to get me interested in this project. But the problem was, they took all of their hiring history data, and they tried to predict, for example, who would get a promotion in their first year. Well, shock of all shocks, no different than any other tech company, they have huge gender bias in their hiring and their promotions. So they trained up this algorithm, this massive deep neural network on all of this massive data, and it would not hire women. Well, I would contend, and I'm right, that being a man versus being a woman is not causal in doing a good job. But boy, is there a strong correlation. And all of these deep neural networks, these modern machine learning tools, they are fundamentally correlational. They don't know causality. They don't know the why, they only see the what.
Yeah.
And so this is how Amazon responded, which is, by the way, the standard response in what we now kind of think of as ethical AI, which is the data is the whole story. So if there's a problem in our model, manipulate the data. So they took out all the gender markers. They took out all the women's colleges. They took out just, if you use the word women's on your resume, they took that out too. So every way that you could tell a man from a woman on a resume was gone. Then they retrained the model. What didn't they take away? The fact that in their first year, men were given promotions at vastly higher rates than women. So how did the deep neural network respond to this new training set? It did something amazing. It discovered who was a woman and then wouldn't hire them. So it went through and looked at word use patterns and course selection and social networks and figured out who was a woman in a way that a human being couldn't, and then wouldn't hire them. They didn't understand the problem that they were trying to solve. They took the presumed problem, which then the algorithm solved the hell out of. But they didn't do the hard work of the human problem solving. And it turns out manipulating the data doesn't solve the problem either. We know, in fact, from 100 years of research, what makes a great employee, independent of race, independent of gender, and it's a trait everyone is capable of having, a whole bunch of traits. In my own work, we've looked at, all right, if we know that a certain set of things are gender and race and socioeconomic invariant, then why wouldn't you build a machine learning system to look for those qualities? Because then you're looking for the thing that science has told us is predictive of success. Once you get that in place, you could start to explore and see if the machine learning can do even better than science has done to date. And it probably can. But start with that fundamental learning. So I've been able to work on systems like that, and I'm, again, immensely proud of what those sorts of systems have been able to do. Build a targeted little AI. Are you resilient? Turns out resilience is a huge predictor of performance on the job. But if you think that an AI will simply discover that, when the overwhelming correlations are about gender and race, then you're very much fooling yourself. It's just not capable of making those sorts of discoveries.
So there's lots of concern or different opinions about what AI will be in the future. Where do you see this going, and also how do you think it will affect the way that we work?
Yeah, there's all sorts of answers that we could go into. One is the most extreme, which is, will AI ever wake up and become more intelligent than we are? And I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. I love reading this stuff. And let me say, from a theoretical perspective, I think we're in existence proof. Clearly, it's possible to build true general intelligence systems, because that's what we are, and I'm just enough of a materialist to believe that that means you could, in theory, build an artificial system that does the same thing. But that is wildly different than what we have built to date. It is interesting that we can build machine learning systems to date that are superhuman in performance. AlphaZero, for example, can trivially easily build AlphaGo, which in turn can trivially easily beat the world's best Go players, and yet have those systems not actually be intelligent in the way we are. Now, this is, what I'm about to say is an opinion, except I have seen nothing to make me think differently, which is none of our existing technologies, if we added more GPUs or TPUs or data centers or anything else, is ever going to wake up and become super intelligent. This idea that somehow your toaster will become self-aware and want to destroy all of humanity is ridiculous. And it's just as ridiculous if we're talking about Google's new BERT model for doing deep language modeling, or some of the most sophisticated reinforcement learning models that learn to play hide and seek or beat human players at Halo. Those are really impressive. But understand, for example, OpenAI's hide and seek system, which I love, took hundreds of millions of hide and seek games to learn the simplest strategies. Human beings do not work that way at all, nor do squirrels or even cockroaches. And so understanding what these systems are good at and what they're bad at is incredibly useful, and not over-promising or under-recognizing that. So will we someday have machines that are smarter than we are? Maybe, but it will require an entirely new set of inventions to get there. So then the other part of your question, how does the reality of AI today change work 5 years from now, 10 years from now, our lives in general? Well, maybe there's two ways to go into that. But the first and most immediate is, if what we have are superhuman task systems. So take an AI model and train it to find all the loopholes in a contract. Take an AI model and train it on how to do a risk assessment in a spreadsheet, or write basic boilerplate code, or recognize whether a mole is cancerous. These systems already exist. They're not coming. They're already here. It's just a matter of how long it takes to really commercialize them and make part of everyday flow. Do they do an entire job? No, because a lawyer's entire job is not simply seeing that there's a loophole. It's deciding what to do about it. So we've trained up a big deep neural network to read through all these contracts and train it how to find all the loopholes. But of course, that's not the whole job of a lawyer, is just finding loopholes. You need to decide what to do about them. Except the majority of lawyers, that kind of is, in fact, their job. Most lawyers at big firms spend a huge swath of their early career just going out and doing contract review and case prep. And now we can build a system that can do that cheaper, faster, and better, often, than a human can do it. And so the point isn't that these systems will take jobs. C-3PO is not going to show up and tap you on the shoulder and let you know that you're fired. But instead, we have to think about what happens as individual tasks get automated away, kind of one by one. And any task that is economically valuable, which is to say, lots of people do it around the world and it generates lots of data, is going to be exactly the sort of thing that gets automated. One interesting difference is the sort of sweet spot for that automation is exactly those sorts of professional, let's call them middle class judgments that people make. There's some idea that AI is going to eat up from the bottom. You know, we're going to put all the taxi drivers out of work and all the warehouse workers. There are people working in spaces like that, it's true, but it turns out those are very complicated problems. And the people doing the jobs do them for very little money. So it actually is not a great place to try and automate. We may see a future in which there are two kinds of jobs. Stuff that's too hard for machine learning to do, too creative, and stuff that's not worth building a machine to do it. And boy, you do not want to be falling below that latter threshold. Low autonomy, low wage power. But if we look right in that middle, then what we see is a world in which it doesn't matter how educated you are. It doesn't matter whether you did all the right things. Are you doing a bunch of rote decisions, however complicated, however many years of university it took to learn how to do them? If you are, someone's going to automate those tasks away. And what's left is the creative labor. What's left is the unknown. It's all of the work that's never been done before that moment that you're doing it. You could actually see that as an incredible silver lining. Imagine every job transformed into that creative labor. I love that idea. I'm wholly enamored with the notion that we could pull as many people as possible into this creative economy and rethink work. But I'm also a realist, which is that takes work. That is genuine effort. And it doesn't happen just because. It doesn't happen because, oh, well, there won't be that old kind of job, so people will just magically become creative. We already pay more money to be creative. If you're going to be that, you'd already be it. We need a deep investment in the kind of deeply human qualities that will actually drive that kind of work. In fact, maybe that's the great irony of all of this, is as machines become more and more a part of our lives, our work lives and beyond, then the answer is be all the more human. But the funny thing is, if I'm talking to business leaders or policymakers, the real focal point there isn't how am I using machine learning, it's what am I doing as a leader? Because if the value proposition of human capital is what makes you different, what's the point of hiring these amazing, creative, different people and then telling them what to do? Leadership needs to transform. It needs to move away from this highly directive, old model, full of hierarchy, and into a place where the rote stuff is done by machines and the creative labor is done by humans, and we make a deep, invested commitment to pulling as much of humanity as we can into that creative space. And I don't see that we're heading in that direction right now, but that is nonetheless the vision that I am trying to promote in my work.
So, I mean, you have a background, or you started out your career as a theoretical neuroscientist, and I remember you commenting at a speech about the future of work on the implications and also the consequences that all this technology has on our brain. And when we speak about like training the skills that make us special about human, and then you commented on the decline actually. What does that say, and like where do you see that going? I mean, that is another big challenge, I would think.
It is a big challenge, and again, it comes to this idea of if we automate these boring jobs away, people will just magically self-actualize and become amazing. Well, actually, there's a much more plausible story, which is that in the absence of people having a purpose in their lives, everything will go in very much the opposite direction. I think one of the things I get to do in my work that probably is not how people think of machine learning or neuroscience at all, is look at some fundamentally squishy notions like purpose or resilience or perspective taking, and try and understand the relationship between that and people's life outcomes. And what's very clear when you look at purpose and life meaningfulness is everybody needs it. Everybody. Maybe some of us get a little more of it from Manchester United than is truly good for us. Or others get it as a matter of self-identity in working at some company. The people that get it the most are the ones that have their own sense of purpose in the world, their own reason for being here. And what's fascinating, and again, this is machine learning facilitated research, is actually getting to see that these people live longer, they're happier, they earn more money, they go further in their education, they have more friends, they're healthier. It's everything you'd want to be true about you when you're 65 years old is vastly more likely to be true in people with these qualities. So again, this idea of being more human isn't just a kind of philosophical statement. It is, when we look at large numbers of people, thousands of people, in some of my research, hundreds to even hundreds of millions of people, we see that these are the qualities that actually predict positive life outcomes. But interestingly enough, these are also the qualities that predict the people that go the farthest in their jobs. And you know, that's worth noting too, that in fact, it isn't whether you know a specific skill or whether you went to a specific school, and it probably never has been those things in terms of where will your life end up. It's always been about being human. I think the point about artificial intelligence is now maybe that's all that's left. You know, our need for people just to be cogs in a machine is kind of going away because we built a better cog. And while that can be scary, because a great many people don't want to beat their job, and they think that the idea of going out and doing this exhausting creative labor is not who they want to be. Nonetheless, I think that we have to deal with that messy problem, which is people with those qualities have better lives in ways that I don't think anyone would dispute, all the way down to they live longer, healthier lives. And how could we get that for everyone without just deciding their life for them? So I get to use machine learning to research these sorts of things and study them. And nowadays, I get to take it a wild step forward, not just using these techniques to explore what it means to be human, but actually using machine learning combined with neuroscience to change what it means to be human. A field called neuroprosthetics or neurotechnologies, or as I used to say when I was going to grad school and telling people what I wanted to do when I grew up, it was, I want to build cyborgs. And this in a way is an answer to a question you asked a while ago, which is, how does the future of work change? I think one of the things we need to wrap around our heads around is, how do we change in deep and fundamental ways as the distinction between machine and person slowly begins to go away? And I mean in ways which are scary, and in ways where I don't think anyone would deny the value of.
If you say that you want to build cyborgs, like, what will be the human part? If you like now we spoke about all this human-centric focus and that we want to build better humans, and now you start talking about cyborgs. Like, where do you see the core of the human in that?
So this is the funny thing. You're just a mad scientist talking about cyborgs, and everyone starts thinking about the Borg or Terminator or something like this. What's interesting is, in this field of research, you could, in theory, augment anything. In fact, when I talk about doing AI work, I don't mean that I do artificial intelligence. I mean that I do augmentative intelligence. How can we take the best of what machines can do and the best of what people can do and bring them together in a truly productive way? And that's hard. It's, again, not a trivial problem at all. Not just the biophysics of building neural interfaces, but also, how do we make certain these systems don't do for us things that we could do for ourselves, but only actually make us better? Now, I could run through a number of examples, but some of these are, I think, really beyond debate, which is, there are a number of groups building, interestingly, non-invasive technologies, which is to say, I just have to put a wearable thing on your head, and they're working on them to treat Alzheimer's, in some cases to treat Parkinson's, to treat other types of mental health disorders. I imagine a world where, if we can't truly cure Alzheimer's, what if we could slow it down, delay it by decades, so it becomes something that's chronically treatable rather than something that completely destroys your life. And I'm not saying we're right around the corner on figuring this out, but there's amazing research coming out of MIT, right here out of UC Berkeley, and elsewhere in the world, showing that these kinds of technologies can truly transform what it means to be paralyzed, what it means to have a degenerative neural disorder. I'm interested in applying these technologies to kids with traumatic brain injuries, where we might actually be able to go to a kid that has essentially had their life story taken away from them because of an accident, or maybe because of abuse, and maybe be able to put the pen back in their hand and let them write their own life story again by literally giving them back the cognitive abilities that they've lost. It is hard, it is complicated, but when your goal is something like this, then you have to try, and you have to confront what comes next, which is, as soon as you've developed a treatment for Alzheimer's and traumatic brain injury, then someone's going to come to you and say, well, can I use that? I mean, I don't have a problem, but if it takes the kid that has a working memory deficit and gives them back their working memory, what would it do to someone that's healthy? And the answer from the lab is pretty straightforward. It enhances your working memory to above what it was. It makes you smarter, at least very temporarily. And then we need to confront what comes next without simply saying yes or no reflexively, because neither of those are the right answer. We need to say, well, what happens when kids of wealthy parents start showing up for standardized tests with little patches on their heads that make them smarter for 2 hours? What happens when people applying for jobs are applying against people that are using technology to fundamentally change their creativity? So it's actually amazing what can be augmented. It's not just, can I compute more numbers? It is itself those things that make us very human. Things like creativity and memory and others. But as you begin to lift them up and make them a function of wealth, suddenly we have a world that I don't know that anyone wants to live in. And part of the reason I do this work isn't just so I can help kids with traumatic brain injury. It's because I want to sit at the table to make certain that this is a human right. That if you want access to this, you will have it, or nobody gets access to it. And if we don't confront this, I know how much it sounds like science fiction, but if we don't having serious discussions about this today, it will be too late. And you know, it's its own inconvenient truth or a big short, I don't know, take your pick, but we need to solve some of these problems before it's too late. Because let me tell you, entrepreneurship in this field is taking off. And the last thing I want is Facebook in my head. But Facebook is, in fact, one of the first movers in this space, as is Elon Musk and a number of other well-known rogues from the Silicon Valley.
I would love to ask you a lot of questions about what you just mentioned, like what Facebook is working on there, but I've got one final question for you today. If I understand it correctly, then you would describe your life mission to help build better, healthy, happier people, and you have a high passion on learning the way we learn. Could you comment on how technologies can improve the way that we learn? Because I feel that learning will be one of the ways that we can actually get ahead and can be better, can be happier, can be healthier. So if you could...
Yeah, you know, there was a point in my life where I needed to make some sort of judgment. I'm a hard number scientist. I may work in some squishy spaces, but in the end, I need to believe that the things I'm doing are actually making a difference in a way which are measurable and demonstrable. So here I'm confronted with something that maybe is a little bit of a leap of faith. The idea that if we could look at the qualities that give people the best lives and then see how we could help everyone develop those qualities, this fairly faith-based notion that it would be a better world. If every soldier had greater perspective taking and emotional intelligence, then maybe they make better decisions as they go out into the field in war. If every business leader had a greater sense of the growth potential of their employees, then maybe they wouldn't be so quick to fire as opposed to develop those people out into who they could be. I think you could go into any domain and say, this could be better. This could be better at a fundamentally human level. And I believe in that so much that I'm willing to take everything I earn every year and devote it to that belief. Let's call this crazy process that I go through a giant experiment in and of itself, which is I'm a mom with 2 kids, and they have a pretty good life here in Berkeley with a couple of scientists for parents and a fairly well-off life. I actually believe the single thing that I could do which would make their life better is to help someone else's kids. And that's what my work is very much about, is this selfish notion that there's a future that we're all going to live in, and all it needs to be better is for someone to make a sacrifice. And the more people that are willing to make at least small sacrifices the better that future could be. So I'm all in my crazy experiment to see if I can make that true in my life. But I keep falling back on the numbers, and I know people that are resilient and purposeful, have rich cognitive abilities, that understand other people better and understand themselves well. It's that, not the university you go to, not whether you know how to program, not whether you've been upskilled. It's those fundamentally human qualities. So whatever future world we live in, whether it has self-aware robots or cyborgs, if that's a world I want to live in, it's a world where each of us are the person we could have been. And that may sound crazy, and it may sound utopian, but why not try for the world you truly want to live in, rather than scraping out the best you can get for the one you happen to find yourself in? And my life is going to be pretty great either way, so let's work towards something that's a little bigger than we are.
Thank you, Vivienne. It's always very inspiring talking to you, and we're all very much looking forward to bringing you to Munich next year.
It's a blast. I've been looking forward to get back there for a long time.
Thank you.
Thanks.